Gouts of plasma arced overhead as Falcon's squad scattered for cover. Meridian felt the heat and energy bleeding from the shots as they impacted the ground behind the squad. Even as she pushed herself up from the ground, the Technomancer started to tug at the strands of reality, slipping her mind into a meditative state as the boundaries of the void approached.
Contact left!
Decant Keck shouted, his black-gray fronds slicked back against his lupine features. The thunderous rat-a-tat-tat of Decure Hold Thunder's kinetic repeater filled the air as she laid down fire on their left flank. Meridian heard him, heard the shouts of her other squad mates as they moved position and returned fire, but her mind logged the communication and shunted it away from her consciousness. That part of her focus, her will, was entirely intent upon the intangible barrier between reality and the void. Tuning her gauntlet, Meridian twisted a hand and grabbed hold of an invisible tendril, pulling hard. Like a wound that has been sutured, the tendril pulled away and a rift opened. The emptiness of the void beckoned, and Meridian willed her body to remain stationary. Already she could hear the whispers as void wraiths gathered on the edge of the barrier, eager to slip into this realm and wreak whatever havoc they desired. Her subconscious registered the continued weapons fire, the orders issued by Tessar Mareth, the looming forms of Regule battle armor approaching their position. If they didn't move soon, another bombardment would pinpoint their location. They would all die in a superheated crater. A hand grabbed her shoulder. Decant Tarrington dragged her to her feet as the whole squad moved and fired in a stuttered formation. Meridian adjusted the attunement of her gauntlet and reached through into the void rift, pulling void energy behind and over them as a fresh barrage of superheated plasma homed in on their location. The plasma dispersed over the void shell, sparking and spattering in multiple directions, starting small fires amongst the foliage. The other members of Falcon's squad swore and kept moving, kept firing. Before she was pulled out of range from the void rift, Meridian poured an immense amount of will into the space between this reality and the nothingness. With the precision of a surgeon, she knit back together the binding of reality, and once the last of the void energy dissipated, she returned to her body, stumbling and almost vomiting. Tarrington had an arm under her shoulder, pulling her along as the squad headed towards higher ground. Sparing a glance back, Meridian saw the Regule battle armor wreathed in void energy, struggling to free itself. Regule foot soldiers swarmed around and past it, but at least she slowed down their armor unit.
We've got transport incoming!
The Tessar yelled.
How long will that shield hold?
Watching the shimmer in the purple-green energy, as the plasma slammed into it, Meridian replied,
30 seconds. Maybe a little more.
She reached into a pouch on her vest and removed a small syringe.
I'll try to give us a little more time,
she said as she jabbed the needle into her neck. Void-synthesized stimulant coursed through her veins, and she felt as though her chest might explode. But with a deep breath, Meridian focused her will once more and looked for another tear in real space. There wasn't one close enough, so she hooked a finger and dragged it through the air, parting the fabric of reality with a concentrated subatomic burn. The folds of real space peeled back, and the void stood open before her. The whispers started again, but she ignored them, drawing on the energy within the void to create another barrier between her squad and the approaching Regule. Sweat beaded on her brow as the concentration required to maintain the barrier burned through the stimulant coursing through her veins. The enemy had identified their location and poured on the bombardment. With every hit, she could feel the barrier weakening, and her own body served as a conduit for the void energy to bolster their defense. Each blow felt like a punch to her sternum. She held on as Tarrington dragged her up the hill. Then the bombardment stopped, and Meridian released the void. With the last gasps of her reserves, she closed the tear and opened her eyes. Falcon Squad stood atop a small hill, looking down on where the Regular forces advanced. Except their advance halted. In the distance, silver, shimmering figures dropped from a passing ship, gravity lances accelerating gravitic fields at the rear of the Regular lines. The Regular forces turned to face the new threat, as Falcon Squad watched and waited for their incoming transport. "Paladasts," Tessar Mareth said. "I'm glad they're on our side." Decure Parvor muttered, "Are they on our side? Religious zealots with advanced weapons and armor. It's only a matter of time before they decide whether or not we're on their side." Murmurs from the others suggested agreement with that sentiment, but Mareth gestured for silence. "They're fighting against the enemy. That's all that matters right now. We have our orders, and they just took the heat off us so we can extract." Parvor shrugged and looked at Meridian. "Hey, you all right?" She nodded, then turned and vomited as though her world just turned upside down. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures, the solo actual play podcast where stories are told at the speed of dice. With me, Steve Morrison, your game master and solo player. Now come on, let's grab the dice and see where our story goes. Previously, in Book 1, Meridian, we meet Sejana Lushale, a licensed independent recovery specialist, as she takes on a new contract, hunting a man named Calavar Rin, who has been accused of stealing data from Gencor. With some help from Ayadi Kailana, pilot of the Howlin Wolf, Sejana tracks Rin down, and from him learns that Gencor is covering up faulty manufacturing of a drug that helps with jump sickness. Gencor sends thugs to retrieve Rin, but Sejana refuses to release him into their hands. She kills them in a firefight outside the Howlin Wolf and meets Inspector Ravenna Hallow, the Cassidon security inspector assigned to the case. Sejana's status as a liar protects her from prosecution in matters of self-defense. Sejana and the crew of the Howlin Wolf, Ayadi, and Captain Einar Stargleam are released from custody. Sejana decides to take the fight to Gencor, and the crew convinces her to include them. They sneak aboard an orbital data relay using void magic and successfully download all the information the media will need to make this a publicity nightmare for Gencor. Returning to Cassida, Sejana is almost assassinated, leaving the Howlin Wolf. She kills her would-be assassin before passing out from her own injuries. She's taken to the hospital for treatment, and Einar is called in by his boss, Mr. Zhang of Zhang Imports. The Howlin Wolf is assigned to take cargo to a neighboring star system. They complete their mission, returning with more cargo and passengers, including a spy named Tashan Vorel, who is operating under the cover identity of Ludin Sarton. He's recruited onto the crew and accepts. His motivation for doing so is as yet unknown. Sejana avoids another assassination attempt in her hospital room and escapes with Inspector Hallow's assistance. She follows the breadcrumbs to an info broker named Rook, who took a job from a crooked inspector. The inspector, Tyron Lavash, follows her to Rook's office and almost gets the drop on her. She captures him and interrogates him, learning he's connected to Verdant Consulting, the firm hired by Gencor to clean up their mess. She boldly visits the Verdant Consulting offices and meets with Sybil Clementine, principal of the organization. They trade barbs, and Sejana leaves without any satisfying conclusion. She decides it might be better to get out of the system for a little while, until things cool down. The Howlin Wolf is assigned another cargo hauling mission to Creus, a star system multiple jumps away. They deliver their cargo, and Sejana picks up a new contract hunting some stolen cargo. In the course of her investigation, she finds the cargo hidden in an underwater warehouse and returns it to its rightful owner. A fleet of Plithan hierarchy ships enters the Creusian system and defeats their defense forces. The Howlin Wolf makes a run for it, but crosses into the sights of a Plithan destroyer. Forced between surrendering or being destroyed, the crew undertakes a highly risky jump inside the jump limit. The first thing Ayati notices when she comes to is the proximity alarm. The second thing she notices is the wetness on her face. Blinking away the confusion, she rubs a hand across her nose and finds blood on her fingers. There's a detached part of her brain that recognizes the signs of a hard deceleration from jump space. But as the proximity alarm gets louder and louder, panic starts to build. Where are the others? What happened? Where are they? There was a missile. It was about to destroy them, but, well, they're still alive. The jump must have worked, but she doesn't remember traveling through jump space. Normally, time passes while in the conduit, but she only has fuzzy memories of the time between activating the jump drive and waking up. Could it have been just minutes? And what is that alarm? She shakes her head and focuses on the sensor panel. The Wolf is drifting through space and is on a collision course with a group of asteroids. They're a couple minutes away from imminent danger, but apparently they're too close for the computer system's comfort. Placing her hands on the controls, Ayati nudges the thrusters to push the Wolf away from the asteroids. Nothing happens. Staring at the display, it takes a moment for her brain to recognize the warning alert showing the ship on emergency power. As it settles in, she realizes a little drifting is no longer a minor concern. Pulling up a diagnostic, she sees a list of inoperative systems. Fortunately, emergency lights, alarms, and comms seem to still be active. Opening the comm, she says, "Cap? Sejana? Luden, can anyone hear me?" There's silence over the comm line. Ayati swears and pulls up the internal scanners. They blink errors at her, and she shakes her head. Unclipping her harness, she slips out of the seat, grateful the grav compensators are hardwired into the emergency system. The emergency restart sits by the engineer's panel towards the back of the cockpit. A feature that might normally make sense on a fully crewed ship, Ayati thinks, but it's damned inconvenient in a crisis when she's the only one on the bridge. She opens the panel and grips the emergency reset, turning it with a whispered prayer to the void. All right, so this was a minor misjump, since they only missed it by 1. So I think the odds of the emergency reset working are actually pretty decent. Let's call it likely. So 75 or less on our percentile dice will be a yes. The power cycles and the ship systems begin restoring. But let's make it interesting. If it's between a 50 and a 75, the reset isn't immediate, and we'll have to make another roll, probably to see if another member of the crew wakes up in time to make a difference. All right, here's the roll. 44. So power is restored, including thrusters. Plus, since that's a match, and according to the Starforged rules, a match produces an interesting complication or opportunity, let's roll on action and theme for an idea. 76 and 31. Release enemy. Is this an opportunity or a complication? I'll have to think about it for a minute. But in the meantime, let's get back to the action. The reset switch turns with a satisfying click, and power flickers off and then back on. The quick screens immediately fill with warnings and alerts, and Ayati breathes a sigh of relief, making her way back to her seat. The asteroids are looming closer and closer, but Ayati tests the thrusters with a quick second burst, and they fire immediately, changing the ship's trajectory. Grinning in satisfaction, Ayati leans on the thrusters and pushes the Wolf out of danger, slowing the ship to a halt. She leans back in her seat and sighs, then looks at the quick display as sensor data begins to stream in. "Now, where are we?" she asks, squinting at the data. Then her eyes widen, and she hits the comm again. Someone? Anyone? Please respond." Darkness fills her vision as Sejana opens her eyes. For a moment, she struggles with the cognitive dissonance of knowing her eyes are open, but seeing nothing. With a thought, she activates the light on her cue. The cockpit around her illuminates, and she can barely see the dark hull of the Howlin Wolf beyond the canopy. Almost immediately, her eye catches movement, a shadow passing at the corner of her vision. But when she turns to look, there's nothing there but more emptiness. It's not quite the all-consuming emptiness of the void. Intellectually, she knows there's space dust and radiation beyond the canopy's safety. But it's hard not to get lost in the dark. Shaking her head, Sejana feels something pulling at her nose. Raking a hand across her face, she sees something wet on her gloves. She has to focus. There could be danger nearby. Activating her comm, she says, "Lushale to Wolf. Can anyone hear me?" There's silence for a moment, then something like a whisper starts, sending shivers down Sejana's spine. She cuts the comm immediately and powers up the harrower. The ship's systems jump to life as though waiting to be called into action. Almost immediately, an alarm begins sounding. Proximity alert. Sejana sees an asteroid field dangerously close, but then she feels a gentle nudge as the Wolf's thrusters fire, steering the ship away from the nearest asteroid. Ayadi's alive. She has to be. It's the most logical explanation for the ship's movement. The proximity alert continues. Sejana's grin slips into a grimace as her fingers reach for the emergency release. "Someone? Anyone? Please respond." Ayadi's voice pipes through the comms. Activating the comm as she completes the docking release, Sejana says, "I hear you." There's a heartbeat of silence, and Sejana fears the whispers will return. But then Ayadi says, "Sejana, stars above, I'm glad to hear your voice. We got trouble incoming." "I see them," Sejana replies, already turning the harrower in the direction of the two craft hurtling towards them. "It's a mess over here. I've got emergency power and the rest of the systems are coming online, but I haven't heard from Einar or Luden. We definitely can't jump again without a full diagnostic." There's a twinge of fear in Ayadi's voice, but she's doing a good job tamping it down. Sejana says, "Focus on creating some distance, even if you have to go into the asteroids. I'll keep these dust pirates off you." The harrower's drive spools up, and the fighter accelerates away from the Wolf like a laze bolt. "Sejana," Ayadi hesitates. "Good hunting." The liar grins. "It's what I do best." The light may be red, but it kisses his face as he wakes. Tashin Voral's first thought is to thank Lucent for the blessing. His lips move to say a prayer, but before the words form, his eyes rest on the Haldren strapped in next to him, and he remembers. He is not Tashin Voral, chosen of Lucent. He is Luden Sartan, an engineering apprentice on a Cassidon cargo transport. Instead of a prayer, his lips form the word, "Captain?" A hand reaches out to touch the Haldren's limp shoulder. His eyes might be clouded to the truth, but he had been kind and fair to Luden since joining the crew of the Wolf. If the captain was dead, he would feel some little grief. At his touch, the Haldren snorts and starts awake, eyes wide. He takes in the room with one look, resting his gaze on Luden. "You all right, kid?" Luden nods. "First misjump?" the captain asks as he unstraps from his seat. "Yes," Luden replies. A truth this time. The Haldren grunts. "Trust me, you never get used to it." He hurries over to the jump drive and starts a diagnostic. "Ayadi, are you there?" "Hey, Cap. Glad to hear your voice. You two okay?" The response is almost immediate, and Luden feels another twinge of relief. Despite his mission, he doesn't mean this crew any ill will. Perhaps they can be saved.
Yeah, we're fine, Einar replies. Status report.
Well, we almost hit some asteroids, but I managed to get the systems rebooted in time.
Good work.
But that's not all. We got a couple rock hoppers barreling down on us. Sejana disengaged her fighter and is moving to intercept them. Doesn't seem like she's in a talking mood, so I hope they get the point and bug her off.
There's a quaver in Ayadi's voice, and Luden wonders if she's worried about the ship's resident liar. Lushale is the only one whose fate doesn't concern Luden.
Titan's asshole,
Einar grumbles, staring at the readouts.
We're gonna have to find fuel and do a full check on these systems before we can jump again. Which means if our liar gets herself killed out there, we won't have any protection. Ayadi, bring the ship around and move us into position to support her.
Cap, might I remind you we do not have any weapons,
Ayadi says.
Something I'd like to discuss at our next crew meeting.
Noted, Einar replies. You said there were asteroids out there. Any small ones we could latch onto and tow?
There's silence on the comm for a second. Then Ayadi says,
Well, yeah, there is. What you thinking?
I'm thinking we might be able to use one as a bludgeon if Lushale can keep them distracted.
He looks at Luden and shrugs.
In the meantime, give me a comm channel to those ships. Make sure Lushale is patched in as well.
You want me to work the comms or catch a rock, Cap? Not sure I can do both at the same time.
Get us a rock, Einar replies. Luden, you'll have to work the comms.
Unlatching himself from his seat, Luden says, I'm not sure how to work a comms panel. Einar grins at him.
On-the-job training. That's what we talked about, right? Pull up the ship comm on that station there and do your best to get someone to talk to you.
All right, let's roll some dice. We've got a few different things to roll for, so let's start with Luden's comm roll, because if he's able to reach someone on one of those ships, maybe Einar can talk some sense into them. We don't really know anything about these two rockhoppers, but if they decide to tussle with a liar, they're going to get what they get. Luden doesn't have any special training in comms, but he is at least trained in electronics, so he won't take the -3 penalty for being completely untrained. He also has an education of +1, so he gets to add that to the dice. I think a target number of 8 makes sense. Pretty standard attempt. Let's roll 2d6, add +1, and find out what happens. 6 is not enough, and the rock hoppers don't respond to the wolf's attempts to communicate. Well, that would have been too easy. Now let's make a roll for Ayadi to see if she can catch an asteroid. I think this should be 2 different rolls. Pilot to maneuver into position, and gunner, maybe, to catch the asteroid with their cargo arm. I don't know if gunner is quite the right one, but because she's going to then try to use it as a projectile in space, I think it kind of makes sense. So let's make a linked test. Pilot up first. I do think this should be a little easier because she was successfully able to slow the ship before it hit any asteroids. So I'm going to set the target number at 6. She's got a +3 to piloting. That is 11 total, which is an effect of 5. That gets added onto her gunnery check. Surprisingly, Ayadi doesn't have gunner cargo arm, but she does have basic training in gunnery, and with her +1 in intellect, she's going to be rolling this at +6. I do think, though, that this is a much harder than average check, so I think I'm going to set the target number at 12. 6 on the dice +6 is 12 exactly. Whew, okay. Finally, Einar is going to try to make sure that the astrodrive is functional, so it won't implode when they fire it off. That's an engineering M drive test. Average target number of 8 +2 for Einar. It's only a 7. Oh, Einar. His head must still be a little cloudy from the misjump experience. He misses something small on the diagnostic. I don't think the drive's going to be destroyed when they fire it off, but it will definitely be damaged and need repairs after the fact. All right, let's go ahead and envision how this plays out. I'm sorry, Captain. I haven't gotten any responses from the ships, and they're still drawing closer. Ludin sighs. Why won't they talk to us? The Huldran shrugs.
Maybe they just don't hear us, or maybe they see a potential haul of cargo. You did the best you could, kid.
The ship shudders, then the comm comes alive.
All right, Cap. I snagged us a ride-along.
Good work, Ayati. The drive should be able to handle the added stress. Fire it up and send us after the harrower.
There's a thrum and whine as the astrodrive spools up, sending the wolf hurtling after the fighter. Under his breath, Ludin offers a prayer to Lucent, though he's not certain if it's for the liar's success or not. The range ticks down as the harrower's acceleration increases. She's only a few minutes outside maximum weapon range. Activating the comm, she says, "Unidentified ships. Identify yourselves or be treated as pirates intent on criminal acts." A minute passes with no response, and the pair of rockhoppers continue to approach. Flicking over to her scanner, she eyes the readout. Inconclusive. Either those small ships are unarmed, or they've been modified to hide their armament. Typical pirate behavior. A change on the readout catches her attention. The Howlin Wolf is turning and accelerating after her. She told Ayati to burn away, and the pilot is smart and trained. She knows better than to muddy the waters when a predator is hunting. Einar must be awake and well. Sejana can't really find a reason to be upset at his decision. He leads with his heart. They're too far away, anyways. And most likely this little dust-up will be over before they could interfere. So Sejana focuses her mind on the two blips closing on her position. Opening the comm again, she says, "Last warning. If you cross into my range, I will fire upon you. Break off now." Still there's no response, and Sejana sighs to herself and primes the weapons. Fine. You want to dance? Let's dance. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures. If you enjoyed the show, please spread the word. And if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or support me on Patreon at patreon.com/errantadventures. You can also buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, my handle on all the socials is @errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the deep, liars.